There is no doubt that the stacking journey is definitely a labor of love. It is something that you start with enthusiasm, but the further and further you go into stacking, it loses that luster. It kind of does lose that excitement. So what would you do if the worst possible situation arises? Your stack gets stolen. Every single ounce of every single metal that you have gets taken from you. Would you start again, or would you call it a day on stacking? I want to talk about that a little bit today because it's interesting, and it's something that, I think is quite different than other types of, wealth preservation or investment or things like that. Because stacking, if you're trying to start from scratch, especially after you've built up a large stack, is going to be a monumental task for a variety of reasons. So first off, could it happen? Could it happen that your stack gets entirely stolen? I would argue yes, not only just because obviously it can physically get stolen, and even if you're keeping it in different places, let's say, for example, it gets taken. How could that happen? Well, honestly, I would say that, the biggest surprises in life come from within. It could be a loved one. Then, you've entrusted the secret of where you have, your stack at, you go through a divorce, your best friend, anything, a relative, anything like that. You could lose, a massive amount of your stack. And that would be a huge blow, not just, financially, but mentally, emotionally, something that you've put your heart and soul in getting taken away like that, like many things in life, right? But would that affect you on the back end as far as starting from scratch? Again, the hardest part, or one of the hardest parts about stacking is, even if you're not doing it for the investment aspect, when you think about stacking from the wealth preservation aspect, I would assume that most of you have goals for whatever that money's going to do for you at some point, even if it's, let's say, hypothetically, estate planning, right? Like, I'm not touching this money. You hear that every so often, my kids are going to get it, whatever. My wife is going to spend it with her new man, after I tap out, whatever it's going to be, there's some type of goal associated with your stack. Now, the hard part there too is that, are they going to appreciate that on the back end? That's a whole separate conversation. But starting from scratch in anything is difficult. Whether, let's say your brokerage account gets hacked and your assets go away. Honestly, I would say you're in a much better position in that aspect than you are with gold and silver, mainly because fraud, you can do something about. Whereas, this kind of stuff. The other hard part with metals is that, most stackers don't insure their metals. It's not going to be counted unless on your homeowner's policy or anything like that, unless you declare it. And a lot of, stackers don't declare this kind of stuff because the whole point is to not let anybody know, that you have it. The thing with that is that, I've heard different takes on that. And one of the things that they say is, yes, insuring it does sound like it would be a smart move, right? You want to, if something happens, you want to get your money back. But the thing is, whenever you record that you have it, you're doing a few things. You're putting it on paper that I have these assets and that they're stored at, let's say, this location or that location. But also, in a real, sticky situation, like let's say a divorce, it can get pretty hairy because, if you, were stacking outside the grid, outside the household, and your significant other really doesn't know about it other than, they may know that you have, a couple coins around, or that's one of your hobbies. They don't know the true scale of your stack. The fact that you put it on an insurance application, if they hire someone like a private investigator or a lawyer, whatever, to find out what you have and where it's at, you just documented that you've got significant assets of some sort. It's a consideration. And again, these things are important because these are things you never think about, when you're just trying to do the right thing in life, which, many of you are. So would you start over? Would you start over with stacking? Now, I would argue most wouldn't. Why? Now, I would say that they would probably purchase some type of metals at some point again, because it's not going to go away. That itch for something outside the system, something physical, a medium of wealth per se is going to be there. But starting from scratch on something that wasn't an investment in the first place, again, with something like this, many of you say it's not an investment, it's this, that, or the other thing. It's definitely not an investment, Chris. Okay. Well, it's much more difficult to start back after you've been doing something for a long period of time that the goal wasn't to grow that money, the goal was to preserve. It's really hard to start back and throw money at something because, as I say time and time and time again, the only thing you don't get back is time. You can make money, you can lose money, you don't get back the time. And so if you're starting something like this that doesn't really benefit you over the time, it's more a preservation of that time that you put in, very difficult to make the case and to start from scratch all over again. So I would say it's going to be very difficult to restart your stack if something like that happens. And it's a real risk, right? Not just, again, obviously you could have a break-in, things like that, but I'm sure many of you, have different stacks in different places. But let's say it did happen. How would you respond to something like that? Can you start over? Have you started over? And what did that entail? Like I said, having something that's a physical asset, such as, metals. It's not real estate. It's not, hey, we had to sell the house because we separated and, she's getting half the proceeds. It's not that. You can get another house. You can buy another, the house probably appreciated while you had it. You're getting a split of it. That's something different. Losing your metals isn't something that's mainstream. It's not something that you're going to be able to justify that, hey, this, that, or the other thing. Real estate, you can. Hey, I had property, she took half of it. He took half of it. Whatever the case is. Those kind of things, normal everyday things. But can you do it with your stack? Can you find that passion again for stacking and make it what it was before? A real tangible part of your strategy? Or would it fall to the wayside because there's no way to start over?